This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight, the very, very spooky, spooktacular Halloween edition of The Other Side of Midnight. I'm very excited to go trick-or-treating with my almost 3-year-old today. His emphasis is absolutely the candy, but whenever there's a discussion, really over the last 2 decades, involving going trick-or-treating, and whether it's with a 3-year-old or especially when kids get a little bit older, 10, 11, 12 years old, there's always a lot of warnings that both parents and the media will almost hyperbolically warn you about. Check all the candy. Make sure there are no razor blades in there. You got to make sure there are no drugs in there, because there's a good chance that a lot of people are just sneaking drugs into the candy so that your child will get high when they're least expecting it. Or if they're trick-or-treating by themselves, you have to make sure they don't get exposed or abducted by pedophiles. Well, someone that has worked hard for many years to dispel some of those Halloween myths and has been really a proponent of Halloween in the form that it was intended to be, has been one of my favorite radio guests, one of my favorite people, quite frankly, Lenore Skenazy. She's the founder of Free Range Kids and the president of Let Grow, the nonprofit promoting childhood independence, also a best-selling author. Lenore, it's great to have you back on the program. Happy Halloween.
Yeah, you too. I mean, midnight, this is kind of the scariest hour, right?
Exactly. From your perspective, what's so great about Halloween from a child's perspective and from a parent's perspective?
Oh, my gosh. Let's talk kids. So for kids, it is the one night of the year that they suddenly get to be their grown-up selves. They get to imagine what they'd like to be, ballerina, ghoul, whatever, ghost, a radio personality, for instance. And then we send them out into the street where they can, practice their trade. They go cold calling on people they don't know, and they try to convince them, try to close the sale, give me some candy. And they're trusted with independence and with basically work. And they get to know their neighborhood, and they have this slightly spooky night, which means that they are a little less spooked by other things in the world because it's exposure therapy. You've done something on your own. It's no longer scary. So it's a real time of liberation for kids. And then that's not even mentioning the candy. Okay. And then candy. I mean, as Jerry Seinfeld says, that's sort of that is the motivation of childhood. Give me more candy.
And in terms of trick-or-treating, our son is almost 3. He's not going to go trick-or-treating by himself. But understanding that every child is different and every child, you have to make your own decisions. What age do you think it's an appropriate start to allow a child to go trick-or-treating on their own?
Well, I wouldn't say on their own, because it's certainly more fun, and I'd say safer if you're in a group.
Sure.
But I try to remember when I was trick-or-treating, and I think it was about 7, 8, something like that, 9. But back then it wasn't so segregated by age. You didn't only go to T-ball in class and ballet with, only fellow 7-year-olds. So if you got an older kid in the neighborhood, an older sibling, a 10-year-old with a couple of 7-year-olds, that sounds great to me.
One of the things that I mentioned is there's always a lot of caution. A lot of parents grow up with Halloween safety warnings about candy tampering, about what you've referred to and others have referred to as stranger danger. A lot of folks are concerned that their child may bite into a Reese's peanut butter cup and get a razor blade in the mouth. Isn't it reasonable for today's parents to still be cautious? How would you respond to those who feel that erring on the side of safety isn't necessarily harmful?
Well, first of all, I love safety. I mean, I really do love safety. I want kids to learn how to cross the street safely. I believe in helmets and car seats and seat belts and mouth guards. But if you're looking for safety from poison candy, you don't have to worry, because in the history of the United States, there have been no children poisoned by a stranger's candy on Halloween. There was one kid who was poisoned by a poison pixie stick with strychnine in it, and that turned out to be the child of a man who had taken out three life insurance policies on him, and this was quickly discovered, and he was executed. It was in Texas. So the idea that strangers are putting poison in kids' candy is an urban myth that I've spoken to the sociologist Joel Best, University of Delaware, who has been, he's usually the go-to guy, not me, but people call him, all the reporters call him right around Halloween to say, well, talk to me about this myth. And he's come to the conclusion, this is a myth that will never die, because no child has been killed by this candy. And every year when reporters call him and say, well, how many kids have been poisoned by a stranger's candy? And he says, none. They go, you're kidding. I had no idea. How could they have no idea? He's practically retired. He's been doing this study for 40 years. 40 years we've been hearing that it's an urban myth and it won't die. It's worse than a zombie.
One of the other things that people are concerned about, and I understand this, is sex offenders. You got to be careful of all those sex offenders giving out Halloween. This is their big holiday. Children are coming up. It's like piranhas, circling their prey. What's your stance on the restrictions placed on registered sex offenders during Halloween? Do you think that despite low statistics for Halloween incidents, these precautions could be worthwhile?
Well, what's interesting is that there was actually a study done on this at Johns Hopkins University, where they have a whole center devoted to preventing child sexual abuse. And what they found is that the study looking at sex crimes on Halloween, I talked to one of the professors who had done the study, and she said, we almost ended up calling our study Halloween, the safest day of the year, because they could find absolutely no evidence that sex crimes went up on Halloween, that people on the registry were molesting children on Halloween, that kids were being, trick-or-treaters were being pulled into houses and, returned sadder and wiser. There's just no evidence of that. So I would say this is another part of our culture. We just love being afraid of extraordinarily unlikely and even never happened fears on Halloween.
All right. A lot of parents are listening. Whenever I have you on, I get someone that either calls or emails me and says, well, the statistics are great, and that's all well and good, unless that's your child. That's the 1 out of 100,000, 1 out of a million, 1 out of 10 billion children that gets abducted or gets harmed. How would you respond to parents who feel a responsibility to foresee and mitigate potential risks, even if they're unlikely, given that it's their safety, the safety of their child that's on the line?
Well, I totally understand that, and I certainly want to keep my kids safe, too. And as it turns out, there is something that kids must be very aware of on Halloween and that parents must prepare their children for, and that is cars. Actually, while the sex crimes don't go up on Halloween, poisoning don't happen on Halloween, but more kids are killed on Halloween than the rest of the year, and that's because they're unused to walking by themselves in the neighborhood. They're unused to looking both ways. Sometimes they're in dark costumes. They're hard to see. And so what you really have to make sure is that your child understands you get to a corner, you look both ways, you carry a flashlight. I would always caution parents to add some kind of reflective material to their costumes so that they're easy to see. And that is the one real-world, statistically proven, could happen to your kid danger that I really want parents to think long and hard about before they let their kids go out, because that's something you can help prevent.
At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is the one and only Lenore Skenazy. Lenore, you've been pretty vocal about these trunk or treats, which have increasingly risen up, especially in suburban areas. What's the matter with the trunk or treat?
I don't have. First of all, I'm going to explain what a trunk or treat is, because not everybody knows.
Sure, please.
Trunk or treat is when a bunch of cars gather at a parking lot of a school or a church or a community center, and they make a circle or a square, and the trunks are sort of facing into the circle, and they're all open, and in each of them is candy and sometimes, clever decorations, sort of like a tailgating party. And kids just go from one to the next, grabbing their food and saying hello, usually accompanied by a parent. And I don't have any problem with them if they are part of Halloween. My problem arises when it's instead of regular old trick-or-treating, because the things that we were talking about at the very beginning of this conversation, that it's Halloween is a chance for kids to, to cold call, to be adults, to get to know their neighborhood, to be a little bit scared, to be independent, to feel the heady joy of being out there in the world, making something happen and coming home with a bag full of candy. Those are all things that don't happen, except for the bag full of candy, at trunk or treat, because it's very circumscribed. It's actually a circle, right? And it is completely supervised. And what it seems to do, it sort of adultifies the holiday, and I'll explain what I mean. When you're an adult and you think Halloween, you think, oh, that's when kids get all that candy. They dress up and they get candy, which is part of it, but it's certainly not the exhilarating part. It's not the transformative part of being in the dark, walking on your own, ringing a doorbell, having to say something to somebody, trick or treat. These are all bigger deals than just the candy. And to say that all they really need is the candy, look, they can get it done in 5 minutes, they go from trunk to trunk, it's a chance for me to see my neighbors, that truncates, as it were, the entire experience of Halloween. And what you're doing is you're pretending that the kids can't handle something that you could, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure that most of your listeners remember trick-or-treating with extreme fondness and think that, oh, I love that, but I can't let my kids do that today. But as we've just been discussing, the fears are out of whack, out of alignment with the actual dangers. And if you could walk around at 7, 8, 9, or 10 with your brother, your cousin, and go to the neighbors and ring the doorbell and deal with the little bit of fear, the little bit of social anxiety that goes along with all of that, those are great things for kids because they're not only exciting, they are good for kids. I mean, what is therapy? Therapy is about facing your fears and dealing with them, and then the fears dissipate. They just disintegrate. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety in children today, and part of it is that we don't let them do anything on their own, anything that we think is a little difficult, right? A little bit of a stretch. But once we do, we feel better. Oh my God, my kid had a great night. Oh, look, she came home with this candy and I didn't have to do it for her. We feel renewed and exhilarated about our kids being so grown up and independent. But the kids, oh my God, this is really, independence is being studied as a therapy, literally a therapy for childhood anxiety. And in a very small study done at Long Island University, the professor found that actually having kids do new things on their own without us hovering worked faster than cognitive behavioral therapy on kids and better than meds. So we have this one free, fun, culturally sanctioned day when we can practice independence therapy with our kids, on our kids, and we should be glad that, our culture has Halloween, because that's the perfect time for kids to start feeling proud and less afraid than they have the rest of the year.
I'm Cindy Lauper with fellow Cosentix advocate, Chef Michelle Bernstein.
We'll share our experiences with plaque psoriasis, with psoriatic arthritis, and Dr. Panico will talk about the possible connection.
Cosentix secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentix. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur.
Learn more at 1-844-COSENTIX or Cosentix.com/Cindy.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
If your brain is at full capacity with to-dos, birthdays, and dinner plans, meet Skylight Calendar. It syncs your entire family schedule onto a sleek digital display, so you focus on important things like where you left your coffee. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/talk. Go to skylightcal.com/talk for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's SKYLIGHTCAL.com/talk.
Feel like you're stuck in career limbo? Clock in, clock out, repeat. No growth, no new opportunities. It's time to break out and break into tech. With CBT Nuggets, you can start building the IT skills that companies are hiring for right now. We make training fast, simple, and practical. From networking to cybersecurity, you'll get short, easy-to-watch videos and hands-on virtual labs so you can build real-world skills without expensive gear or complicated setups. For just $59 a month, you get unlimited access to our full training library. That includes certifications, skill-based learning, and practice exams, a $100 value included free. Learn anytime, anywhere, and get job ready on your terms. Thousands have used CBT Nuggets to launch new careers, and you can too. Right now, CBT Nuggets is offering a free trial. Easily find the training you need and test it out with no commitment. Start your 7-day free trial now at cbtnuggets.com. Don't wait. A better job is just a few clicks away.
If folks are just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. You're listening to The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Lenore Skenazy. Lenore, what has the something that wasn't the case when we were growing up, but is the case now? It seems like almost every house has a Ring camera where you can see immediately on your mobile phone who's coming up to your door. What has the advent and the prevalence of these Ring doorbells done to the tradition of trick-or-treating?
That I don't know. It's a really interesting point I haven't even thought of. I can say that the one thing that's interesting to me about Ring cameras is that once people have them, they can't imagine having ever lived without them. And what it means is that you're replacing trust with surveillance. And you think that would make you feel really good and safe and secure. But actually, as trust erodes, people feel more afraid. So ironically, saying I must know everybody who comes up to my door and I couldn't possibly open the door without seeing them approach and, practically getting their ID and their DNA, you think that would make you feel like, okay, I'm safe, but it actually makes you feel like you're living in such a scary dystopian era that you can't trust anyone, God forbid, who's approaching your door.
All right, you have a very interesting op-ed in the New York Post this week all about something that my wife has actually noticed, the increasing graphicness and grossness of a lot of these lawn ornaments that people see around Halloween. This has gotten worse over time, hasn't it?
It has. I was on my way to my morning walk here in Queens, Queens, New York. And on my way to the park, I see, an upside-down body bag hanging from a tree. Yeah, I see something that looks like a latex half-person covered in blood trying to get out of a window. And I hear there's a robot that, giggles like this kid that's been trapped in a dungeon. And I'm trying to think the other horrible thing I see. And a door covered with bloody handprints. Like somebody was trying to get out and they were dragged to wherever. So I thought, I don't remember things being quite that graphic and really straight out of not just a scary movie, but a real horror slasher movie. So I started calling up some people who work at Halloween stores and some people who design Halloween decorations. And it's not my imagination. I called this one place called, Pumpkin Pulp. The guy was extremely nice. It's a wholesale place that sells Halloween decorations. And I said, well, what's your big seller? And he said, oh, we have a great one. It's the slaughtered pig head. I'm like, oh, why did I ask? And, you put it on your head and then you can breathe through the snout. I'm like, okay, that's one thing. Then I called a Halloween store in Manhattan, and she was talking about all the animatronics. And animatronics look like, whether it's a ghoul or a ghost or a skeleton or a zombie that moves, the eyes light up.
Sure, my neighbors have them, yeah.
Right. Well, she said that they had to bring one of theirs indoors. They used to have it on, but so many people on the street were lurched at by this zombie, breathing fire and looking bloody that they kept punching it. And she said, they just wheel around and go whack because they really thought somebody was coming to get them, with the axe or the saw. And so these things, I think, are, how did we get to this point? And I was asking around, and there are a couple of thoughts. And one is because we don't let kids do much of their trick-or-treating on their own anymore, maybe the holiday just became so much more adult-oriented. Everybody knows that an adult is going to be with a kid, so they don't have to hold back and think, wow, that's probably a little too much for a 6-year-old. But another theory is that it's sort of like the internet. I mean, the internet keeps, they keep coming up with the for you, next video, next, tweet or whatever.
These algorithms, sure.
The algorithms spin people towards really scary, dark, awful stuff. And maybe people have gotten so used to sort of one-upping the gore, the fear, the dystopian nature of life that now they're just putting it on their lawn.
That's such an interesting point, because I've wondered this. Obviously, this is the first Halloween where my son's really been that aware of what's going on, and he can ask questions, and it's really challenging to have to explain, oh, that's a decapitated skeleton. That's a bloody machete. I really don't know how to have those conversations with a 2.5-year-old. But that's so interesting, both of those theories, that it's become more of an adult holiday, and that the algorithms have pushed people to more and more gore. Really interesting stuff. Lenore, before I let you go, not necessarily related to Halloween, but in terms of a broader parenting philosophy, given that the modern world is arguably more complex and populated than in decades past, could it be that increased supervision, including structured activities, is a response to these sort of changes rather than merely unfounded fears?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons that we watch our kids all the time, far more than we used to. And I hadn't thought of population as a possible reason, but I would say it more has to do with the idea that now that we can watch our kids all the time, we have smaller families and we have two incomes. So, somebody could be watching them all the time, or you can pay somebody to watch them all the time. We get used to it to the point where it starts seeming, why wouldn't you watch them all the time? And once it becomes sort of a moral imperative, you should watch children all the time, the idea of stepping back and saying, no, I trust you. I remember how important, free time and free play and going in the woods or riding my bike were as a kid. I want to give that to my kids. That almost becomes unacceptable, almost immoral, which is why we sometimes have parents who are, investigated simply for letting their kids walk to the park or walk home from school. What I would say is that while we think that we're making kids safer by always being with them or always electronically watching them, what I've seen happen over the decades, and what was just proven to be true in a really interesting article in the Journal of Pediatrics, a tip-top journal for doctors, is that as kids' independence and self-sufficiency and free play have been going down literally over the decades, not just since COVID, not just since phones, over the decades, their anxiety and their depression have been going up. So we feel like we're saving them from very, very unlikely dangers, the kidnapping or whatever. But the chance of exposing them to a far more likely danger of depression and anxiety is sort of ignored. And I'd say, let's make our parenting safe in line with, the real statistics and the real danger, which is raising a generation that, as my Let Grow co-founder has called it, the anxious generation. Kids are less anxious when we trust them with more.
Well said. Lenore Skenazy, it is always a treat to talk with you. Happy Halloween.
Okay. You too, Frank. Thanks so much.
Thank you. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you're welcome to give me a call, 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.